Good morning, everybody. As we go to the Chitas of today, we're holding in the book of Numbers. We're holding in the portion of Shlach. We're holding on chapter 15, verse number 17. God spoke to Moshe, saying, "Dabba b'nei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people of my might, and tell them, when you come to the land, which I'm bringing you, Shama there." Now she says this mention of arrival to the land is different than all other mentions of arrivals in the land stated in the Torah. In all other cases, it says kisavai or kisavayu when you arrive, when you come. Therefore, inferences that can be drawn from one another. Since the Torah specifies for one of them that it applies only after they take possession of the land and settle it, and that applies to all others. This, however, says bivayachem. It's a different expression, not when you come, but when you come in. Bivayachem, implying over here, the Torah tells us immediately because in the other interests, in the other like Bikurim and other laws, the Jewish people were not obligated until they conquered the land and divided it, which took for 14 years. But the mitzvah of challah, which we're going to come into, the mitzvah of taking off challah from your dough, is obligated the second you came into the land, and eating of its bread. They were obligated to separate challah, and that's why the Torah says over here, "Bevayachem." Verse 19, "Vayachem when you eat the bread of the land." Tarimo truma Hashem, you have to take off a truma, an offering to God, which is the mitzvah of challah. Reishis arisesechem challah. Donate from the first of your dough a loaf, tarima truma, raise off an offering. Ketrumas gedem, like you donate from the raising an offering of the threshold. There's a truma of flour that you have to also give to the kohen. But then when you bake it, before you bake it, you have to take a piece of challah, kain tarima from a piece of challah from the dough. Now she says, when you need as much dough as accustomed to need in the desert, and how much is that? This indicated in the verse, the measure of an omer, 30, an omer per head, 31. You must donate the first portion. Omer lagagla, it's an omer. So you have these two verses, meaning the first portion, meaning before you eat of it, you must separate as a first part a loaf selected for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Challah, what's challah? Challah is tortelle in Old French, which means a cake, a loaf. Ketrumas goyden, about which no fix over here. We don't have a fixed amount. In the truma, there's no fixed amount, in which no fixed measure is stated, and not like the donation given to the tithing with the meiser, which about the fixed amount is stating. However, the term of a loaf implies that it has some substance. The sages define this amount to be, for a private person, 1/24 of the dough, and for a baker, 1/48. So this is, even though really truma and challah doesn't have an amount, but they did give an amount to the mitzvah of challah. How much challah, how much dough, how much flour you need to take off to do the mitzvah of challah. And that we do till today. That if the woman that makes challah, she would take off a certain amount. So the difference between a woman that takes challah and a bakery that takes challah. From your first portion of your dough, you must make a gift to God in all your generations. Rashi says, why is it mentioned again? Since it stated the first of your dough in the previous verse, which is written in a plural. I may thus understand it means the entire first batch of several batches of dough needing at one time, thus exempt from the rest. Therefore, the Torah says, "Merachis," from the first portion, some of each dough, not from the entire dough. You don't have to, again, so a baker that the kanaya bakes pounds and pounds of dough, they don't have to take from each schelet, they take from the entire batch. Titnu lavayet truma. Since we have not heard what the measure of challah, as it says here, you must give, indicating there must be enough to be considered a gift. Sheyesh ba kedei nesina. And therefore the Chazal, the sages, kotitnu. So therefore the sages did give even a truma. They said it's three different, even truma, what you give to a kohen, not the challah. Is 1/50th, 1/60th, 1/40th. Depends, you had an ayin toiva, cheaper eye, a more giving eye. Verse number 22, and if you make a mistake and you don't fulfill these commandments, Ashadibra Hashem al Moshe, which God has spoken to Moshe. Now, what is the meaning of this? If you earned and not fulfill, idolatry was included amongst all commandments, Rashi says, for which it stated that the community must offer a young bull. If the community makes a mistake, we already learned that the entire community needs to bring a bull. But Torah here makes an exception to that category, in that it requires a young bull as an ascent offering and a goat as a sin offering when it comes to Avodah Zarah, mistake of Avodah Zarah. So the verse, therefore, this is the Gemara. So the verse Avodah Zarah kosim medaber. Again, Rashi says the verse is speaking about the sin of idolatry, or perhaps it's transgression of any commandments. In order to preclude this presumption, the Torah says all these commandments. The says kol ha-mitzvah. Whether you have a mitzvah that when you don't do it or you mistake in it, you have all the mitzvahs. It's kol ha-mitzvah. How is that possible? How is it possible for a person to do all negative 200 and 365 negative commandments? How is that possible? So therefore, there's one commandment that has within it all negative commandments, and that is the Avodah Zarah. That is worshiping idols. And just as one who transgresses all commandments he denies God's authority, betrays his historic covenant between God and the Jewish people, he flouts the rational behind them. So too, the transgression of this command, one who does Avodah Zarah, so one who denies entire Torah, goes against entire Avedas. But if one, even though he keeps the other Avedas, doesn't do other sins, but he worships idols, is as if he's done all sins. One inherently denies God's authority, betrays his covenant, contradicts the rational thinking. Which commandment is this? That's the commandment of Avodah Zarah. And that's why the Rashi says this verse, even though it doesn't say it openly, the Gemara says this verse is talking about Avodah Zarah, the worship of idols. Hashadibra Hashem al Moshe, which is the commandment that God spoke to Moshe. Anech Hashem v'liyelecha, the two commandments. The two commandments of I'm God, your God. You shall not have any other gods. One thing did God speak of, but they heard is these two. These are the two mitzvahs that God said himself every Jewish people heard. Verse 23 is Kol Hashativa Hashem Elekechem. All the God commanded you through Moshe, Yad Moshe. When the day that God commanded you, Vahala, and from then and on, the day to Seichem for your generations. Ashi again says, what is the Torah talking about? This tells us that any recognition of idolatry, in essence, constitutes a denial of the entire Torah, given by God, and everything pronounced by the prophets, as it says, from the day on which God commanded you, from then and on, even the whole Tanakh, which happened hundreds of years after the giving of the Torah, but it's part of Torah, and therefore, when you worship idolatry, God forbid any Jew worships idolatry, is denial in the entire Torah. It's a kofer in the Torah. Verse 24. If it's done inadvertently because of the eyes of the community, let's see what that means. And then, therefore, the entire community will bring a sacrifice. Par ben bakar, they'll bring a bull. That's like Yom Kippur. In Kippur, they also brought a bull. One for an oila burnt or and he has to bring also the mincha, the meal offering, and its libations, kemishpat, as the law says. We see it ism, and then he has to also bring a young he-goat, lachatas, for a sin offering. Now she says, if this transgression was done through the eyes of the community, what does that mean through the eyes of the community? That means the Sanhedrin, that for whatever reason, the Sanhedrin allowed idol worship. They didn't know it was idol worship. On account of a mistake, meaning they mistakenly ruled that a certain mode of service may be used to serve idol worship. Whatever that means, if it ever happened. The chatos is a sin offering. The word missing is an aleph over here in this word chatos. If you take the word lechatos, we're missing a couple of letters in this word. Chasad aleph, we're missing a aleph to indicate that it's unlike any other sin offering. For in the case of all sin offerings stated in the Torah, they are brought along with an ascent offering. The sin offering precedes the ascent offering. That's usually the way it goes. The chatas goes before the oilof. Remember in the portion of Vayikra. As it says, you must offer the second one as an ascent offering. But in this case, the only time that it is changed is by this story of if the entire community by mistake does avodah zara through the direction of the Sanhedrin. The ascent offering precedes the sin offering. Verse 25, and the priest will bring atonement upon the entire Jewish nation. And they will be forgiven. Because this was a mistake. They brought a sacrifice Ishel Hashem as a burnt offering to God. And the sin offering before God on their mistake. Now she says, meaning this is one stated in this passage, which is the young bull of the ascent offering, the oilah, for it says a fire offering for God. And the sin offering is the soir, is the goat. Verse 26, V'nislach l'chaladas b'nei Yisrael. This verse is mentioned many times on Yom Kippur. Or if you'll listen to the prayers on Kippur, you'll see this verse mentioned. V'nislach l'chaladas b'nei Yisrael, and the entire community of Israel, and to the resident, those the converts who reside in the midst of the Jewish people, ki l'chal ha'am b'shgaga, for all the people have erred. And that completes the Chumash for today. Now go to the Tanya of the day as we continue in the chapter 7 of Tanya. Shara Yichud Ve'Muna, in the portal of faith and unity. The Alter Rebbe yesterday explained the debate in Tzimtzum Kipshutai. Do we say the contraction when the Arizal wrote that God contracted himself? Does it mean Kipshutai, that he actually contracted himself and walk, and so to say, separate himself from the world? Or Tzimtzum Shloi Kipshutai? Or Tzimtzum is not to be taken literally. And the Alter Rebbe explained that even those that said that it meant Tzimtzum Kipshutai really did not have a comprehension, because they would not even themselves believe in that. Because everybody believes that God is watching over him, and he has Hashgacha Pratis, and God is upon him every second of the day. So it's impossible that God to separate himself, and everybody believes Maminim b'nei Maminim, and it's totally a contradiction. If these tzaddikim and these wise men would have ever thought that they meant Tzimtzum Kipshutai, which I said that ultimately the Jewish world, the Talmidei Chacham, the sages of the society of the Jewish nation, came about to agree with the Alter Rebbe at the end of their debates, ultimately in history. But the Alter Rebbe goes further and explains that this is also what explains in Chassidus, Oid HaMamale v'Oid HaSoviv. Chassidus is the concept, the way God fills the world, and God is serving, encompassing the world. So again, we have a word in the Kabbalah, which is called Soivev Kolalmim, which means that he encompasses. So in the English translation, the simple meaning that it doesn't come within. And again, you can say by mistake that the meaning is that there's an aspect of God that does not enter within. And that is Hepech HaTorah. That is the opposite of godliness. Cannot say that on God. So even though there's such an expression, it does not mean literally. That's the only word that they can use. And that's what they use. Memale, the way God fills the world, and Soivev, the way God compasses the world. So they used the word. They couldn't use it. How do you find a word that means he's there, not there? You can't find such a word because it's above human understanding. How can it say a word? So therefore, they use the best word they can. And that's Soivev Kolalmim, the way God encompasses the world. This does not mean to say, heaven forbid, don't take the word and say, oh, we're going to literal word. Oh, since it says Soivev Kolalmim, it means that God's not within the world. That God is not found within the world. Because you say Soivev encompasses. But really encompasses them. Rather, the Kabbalah found the best word to use for the express what it means, this concept of that God is self-understood as he fills the world, he's above the world. He's above the world. At the same time that he fills the world, he's self-understood above it. He doesn't. There's a non-revealed. It's impossible for God to reveal himself. He's there, but he's there in a non-revealed capacity, so to say. And Pirush Derech Mashal, he gave the example. Adam is boinen. When a person thinks about be'ezah dava chachma, and any wisdom, any something, then any analogy. When a person reflects upon a concept, b'sichlai with his mind, dava gashmi b'machshavte, or he thinks about a cup, he thinks about something physical with his mind. As I sichle machshavte makifin ala davar hu, then his mind, his thought, his intellect encompasses that subject. Encompasses it, whose image is formed in his thought and his mind, in so much as they are found within his thought and mind. But they, the intellect and thought, do not encompass that subject in actual fact. So I can think about the bottle, how it looks. I can imagine, I can see this bottle, and I can close my eyes, and I can see the bottle in my mind. But the bottle is not in my mind. Merely encompass the image of the subject, not the actual subject. When one envisions a table, the actual physical table is, of course, not found within his brain. The image of it encompasses there. So therefore, in essence, you can give that analogy. The image encompasses it. Now, you can't say that on God himself, because when God, the image is in his brain. And that's the difference. By God, the table is there. The physical is in the spiritual. And therefore it's written by the Eibush that my thought is not your thought. We can comprehend that concept that by a human being, his thought cannot encompass a thing that he thinks about. Doesn't have it there physically. His thought and knowledge of all created beings actually encompassed each and every creature. The Eibusher thought is the thing. Because the Eibusher thought is the life force. Create something from something to nothing. So we are in the thought of God. We are here because of the thought of God. God's thought, unlike man, thus encompasses the actual subject of his thought. In this case, all created beings, every created entity is in God's thought. If it wasn't in God's thought, we wouldn't be here. It brings about their creation and continued existence. Even though it does not descend to their level and become internalized within them, but it remains exalted. So God's thought is exalted, But God's thought is right there. And that's the meaning of the verse. Now you understand the verse. My thought is not your thought, in a simple meaning. Because your thought can only have ethereal things, can only have things that are not physically tangible. You can't take the table in your brain. But the Eibishter, the table is in his thought. So the difference is, when you say Mamalo Kalalman, Sefer Kalalman, is the difference is in revelation, not in action, not in actuality of where the godliness is. It's revelation. Mamalo Kalalman means what's revealed in the table, and the Sefer Kalalman is what's not revealed. But both of them are there. Whether it's a light that encompasses, whether it's a light that's within, it's the same Oir Havaya. Same concept of light of God. And he who fills the world, when the Kabbalah says the way God fills the world, it's life force that becomes enclosed, meaning it internalized within the essence of created being. It's a powerful contracted within it according to the instinct nature of the created being, which is finite. Shibal gevul v'tachlis, bekamis ve'echos. It's both in quality and quantity and quality. Dahainu my loss meaning its significance and importance. Since the life force must vest itself within the finite created being and unite with it utterly, it must necessarily be contracted and limited according to the instinct finite nature of the created being. For example, the sun, the sun itself, the body of the sun, how powerful it is, still has a limited quantitatively, being approximately, I don't know, this is the Gemara, the Gemara says that the sun is 167 times the size of the earth. It's not this is a Gemara, so I don't know if it works out with scientists today, but that's what the Gemara says. So that means even though the sun is 167 times bigger than the earth, there's still a size to the sun. I think science will also say there's a size to the sun. It might be whatever the size they give it. It ultimately still it has a size. It's a planet. So too the power of the sun. There's a significant. There's a power to the sun. There's a power to the extent of the power of the sun. Because the sun, even the sun is that's a very powerful planet within the world, is not unlimited. Because if it was unlimited, God forbid. First of all, it would be terrible, but also it's not. It's a creation. The sun is a creation, like the world planet is a creation, like all the planets of the world are creation. Everything is created. Everything has a time and space. Hence, inherently limited. So, though the light of the sun illuminates at a unbelievable distance from the world, that distance is also without limit. Is not without limit. So everything has its limitation. That's why we have winter and summer, because the question is, how far are we away from the sun? How far the sun is away from the earth? So we see that the power of the sun has its limitation, and it depends where it is in its distance from the sun to the earth. Because everything is a creation. Everything that's a creation has limitation. And so too all created beings is finite and limited. As the Gemara again says, whatever the Gemara means, traveling. I know what the word travel in the Gemara meant, that from the earth to the heavens, a journey of 500 years. So whatever, again, the Gemara means that there's a 500-year journey between this earth and the heaven. And it doesn't mean to the moon, because because the moon is part of this earth, so it's part of this earth. So whatever that means from the one hand, because according to the Talmud, which is truth, the 7 heavens, and from each to one heaven to the next heaven is 500 years travel, etc. It's a far distance, the heavens of heavens of heavens, as we say in davening. Shmei Hashamayim. So there's heavens upon heavens. Again, it can go into Rambam. The Rambam tries to explain this in this aspect of the 7 heavens. Therefore, ultimately, the life force that is invested in all these heavens and all these even in this one heaven that we are in, and the earth and the heaven that we are in, and what we all know, all the unbelievable stars in the heaven, all these things. Every place has its own power and its own life force that God gives it. The first must undergo numerous and powerful contraction until it creates each and every one of these concepts. And naturally, to Malik Kalalman, the way the Eibishter ultimately reveals himself each and every part of this world, comes into Mamalakam, it's great contractions, but there's at the same time, there's a Sefer Kalam, the way the Eibishter reveals himself in every world in a way that is above the world, but is above the revelation of the world. That's what the Alter Rebbe is coming to. But the Alter Rebbe is first explaining the concept of Mamalakam, that ultimately each world is different. As we know, each world is different, and in the world itself, each entity is different, and every human being is different. And Bali Gvul V'Tachlis, as they brought to existence in a power and light, that they are different, they're contractedly different. Only after a process of self-limitation, with all the limited life force, to be able to invest itself within the finite created beings and become united with them, as we'll soon explain. The Alter Rebbe is going to go more deep into this concept of Tzimtzum, of the concept of Tzimtzum and the way Mamalaka, which is the aspect of Mamala Kalam and Sefer Kalam, the way God encompasses the world and the way God fills the world, each part to its existence and to its nature and to its ability. And I hope that you continue learning tomorrow by yourself. As it's Shabbos, today is the 24th day of the month, which is which is the Halal in the Tillim, in chapter 113 to chapter 118. If you do those 6 chapters, you do the Chitas of the day. Today is the 24th day of Sivan. The Rebbe writes in the Hayom Yom, today, you ask the question somebody asked in Chassidus, in Yechidus or a letter. How, this is the Frierdiker Rebbe is writing, how can one be bound to me and I do not know you personally? When I did not know you personally, somebody asked the Frierdiker Rebbe that question. And the Frierdiker Rebbe answered, the true bond is created by studying Torah. That's the bond between one person and another person. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, when you study my Maimorim, you read my Sichas, my teachings, and associate with those that are dear to me, the Chassidic community and the Tamimim, in their studies and the Farbrengens, and you fulfill my request regarding saying Tillim and observing Torah study times. And this is the bond. I just want to tell you all, this is the Yom Yom, that the Frierdiker Rebbe was the one who instituted Chitas, that every Jew should learn Chumash and Tanya every day. The Rebbe pushed it even more and self-understood. This is the way we connect. Today we connect with the Frierdiker Rebbe, with the Rebbe. We're learning Tanya. We connect with the Alter Rebbe and all the Rabbeim of all generations who went in the footsteps of the Nasiach Chabad, from the Alter Rebbe till our Rebbe. So we make a great kesher, not only between each other, learning Torah, but a great bond with these tzaddikim, and learning Torah is a bond with the Eibush, self-understood, the bond with God. And we should only continue on doing this on a regular basis. Have a wonderful and beautiful Shabbos. I wish you all a wonderful Shabbos. And God bless you all. See you all on Sunday when we'll continue at 8 o'clock to learn the Chitas of the day.